Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony from a panel of experts and industry leaders who will provide their perspectives on CISA to the subcommittee through the lens of its stakeholders. These witnesses will help the subcommittee explore how the agency has gotten to where it is today and provide ideas to help mature the agency by 2025 and beyond. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I'd like to thank the members of the subcommittee and our witnesses for joining us for our first hearing on the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection Subcommittee of the 118th Congress. I'm honored to continue the great work we started in this subcommittee last Congress, this time as chairman. We are here today to discuss a key agency to our homeland security, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, within the Department of Homeland Security. CISA has a critical mission set. It is tasked with administering federal cybersecurity requirements, supporting private sector cybersecurity, engaging with the sector risk management agency community, and ensuring the physical security of our critical infrastructure. Today, we will focus specifically on the cyber aspects of CISA's mission. CISA has a direct impact on securing critical infrastructure, federal agencies, and our way of life. It is an agency built on partnerships, and those partnerships with stakeholders play an important role in furthering CISA's mission. So today, we will hear from some of those stakeholders to understand CISA's strengths, weaknesses, and where it needs to go in the future. In recent years, the United States has experienced a deluge of high-profile cyber incidents, from SolarWinds to Colonial Pipeline to Log4Shell vulnerability. Our cyber defenses, workforce, and processes have been put to the test, and CISA has been at the center of every response. These incidents have elevated cybersecurity issues across the country and highlighted the importance of securing both federal and critical infrastructure networks. As a result of the evolving cyber threat landscape, Congress has asked a lot of CISA from day one and expected it to succeed. The reality is that CISA is still a young agency. It was created in 2018, and since then, it has grown exponentially. Since fiscal year 2019, Congress has nearly doubled CISA's annual budget from $1.68 billion in fiscal year 2019 to $2.9 billion in fiscal year 2023. And we're now looking at fiscal year 2024 request of $3.1 billion. This level of funding would be a lot for even a large, mature department to handle. Congress has also given CISA significant new authorities, including the responsibility of establishing a cross-sector incident reporting rulemaking and the authority to persistently hunt for threats on federal networks without prior agency approval. Properly executed, these new authorities and resources will help CISA accomplish its mission. This Congress, our subcommittee will conduct rigorous oversight of CISA to ensure those new authorities are implemented appropriately, and CISA is a responsible steward of taxpayer dollars. We need to take a step back and allow CISA to get a handle on their new responsibilities and ask pointed, productive questions about its efforts. Like CISA is a partner to industry to help them improve their cyber posture, Congress should be a partner to CISA to help the agency mature and reach its full potential. We have 4 distinguished witnesses to kick off our efforts. Each witness brings a different perspective on CISA and its partnerships. With these witnesses, we will examine CISA's role as the nation's risk manager and how it balances that role with its responsibilities as a sector risk management agency for 8 sectors. We will consider the proper role for regulation while balancing security and collaboration with CISA as a partner to industry. We will also delve into CISA's federal network programs as well as external efforts as a partner with private sector to improve critical infrastructure cybersecurity, particularly through the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. Sounds like a lot we're doing today. Additionally, we will discuss CISA's effort to secure operational technology, or OT, an important aspect of critical infrastructure mission. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not comment on the need to address the cyber workforce shortage that both the federal government and many industry partners across the 16 critical infrastructures face. None of these efforts that I've outlined today will be possible without a fully equipped cyber workforce, and I look forward to discussing the ways in which we can address the over 700,000 cyber workforce gap that exists today. I'm looking forward to a thoughtful and productive conversation about CISA and how it could improve and grow in the future. It's imperative that CISA succeed in its important mission, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to find bipartisan ways to ensure that it does. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for his opening statement.
Thank you, and I thank the chairman and congratulate the chairman and his staff for taking over this subcommittee. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, and there's a lot of topics that come before this committee where you'll see passionate debate between both sides, mostly earnest, substantive debate. But here, I don't think there's much daylight between the two of us as far as what our cybersecurity threats are and the resolve that the two of us have to meet them. And for me, particularly in my congressional district, with so many people who work in high tech, with 2 national laboratories, to also make sure that we can deploy awareness and technologies to small businesses in an affordable way. 10 years ago, when I first came on this committee, you had to be this tall to be a target of a serious ransomware attack. Today, small businesses, thousands of small businesses are being hit every single day. And so it's part of my goal on this committee to work with the chairman to make sure that we can really harden the defenses, especially for critical infrastructure, but especially small businesses. I want to thank the witnesses for participating today and also our staff who prepared this hearing. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Subcommittee has a strong history of bipartisan support and bipartisan collaboration. And I look forward, as this is the first committee hearing of the year, to working with the chairman and his staff and his members as we pursue that. But speaking of CISA, as the chairman pointed out, we have nearly doubled since 2019 CISA's budget. When we established it 4.5 years ago, we envisioned the agency as a sophisticated cybersecurity and infrastructure organization. Thanks to bipartisan work on this subcommittee and the full committee, it has matured rapidly and growing more capable of meeting our nation's complex and diverse threat environment. All of us have been impressed by what CISA has been able to accomplish so far. However, as the chairman referenced, we need to work to support the agency as it continues to adapt to the cybersecurity needs of our federal government, critical infrastructure sector, and private enterprises, especially small businesses. From election security to Shields Up, CISA has demonstrated an ability to dynamically surge resources to counter emerging threats and collaborate strategically with the private sector. Looking ahead, Director Easterly has set ambitious goals to modernize CISA's federal network security programs, to tactically engage with entities whose resilience matters most to our national security, and to drive adoption of secure by design and secure by default. At the same time, CISA is in the process of implementing the Cyber Incident Reporting Bill, is in the second year of the state and local cyber grants program, and is executing on a range of new authorities. As we speak, this week, they're hosting the inaugural Planning Summit for the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, also known as JCDC, which was established in August 2021. Everyone who I've spoken to about JCDC has told me and our staff of its importance to ensuring productive collaboration between CISA and the private sector. JCDC has enabled rapid information sharing among government and private sector partners following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and it was critical to addressing the Log4j vulnerability. But JCDC has existed for 1.5 years without a charter or concrete criteria for membership, all of which are essential for the JCDC to provide enduring value. And a number of people have asked me, how do we get into JCDC? Toward that end, in the coming weeks, I plan to introduce legislation to clarify the activities of the JCDC to improve on its successes and increase its impact. CISA is also in the process of growing its support for operational technology security by continuing implementation of the Cyber Sentry program and the Industrial Control Systems Cybersecurity Training Act, which I introduced and was signed into law last year. I say this to make the point that while CISA pursues the ambitious agenda set by its leadership, it must also effectively execute its existing obligations, including to promote the great training and educational resources provided by CISA that are widely utilized across industries. 2 principles drove Congress's work last year in this subcommittee: an increase to the federal government's visibility of malicious cyber activity, and second, pushing resources to entities most vulnerable to cyber attacks. As we approach oversight this Congress, we must ensure the laws we've enacted deliver concrete security value and preserve the trust we've built with the private sector to advance critical cybersecurity policy and work with CISA to address gaps. CISA's collaboration with the private sector is essential to both its federal network and critical infrastructure activities. I'm glad we're kicking off this Congress by hearing from some of CISA's most active partners. The testimony from our witness today will play a key role in the ongoing oversight of CISA moving forward. With that, again, welcome to the witnesses, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening us.
Thank you, Ranking Member Swalwell, and I have to say, we had a lot of wins on this committee the last 2 years, and I'm really looking forward to working with you. A lot of bipartisan wins, so I think we're going to be able to do a lot together. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I am pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered the affirmative. Thank you. Please be seated. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Tina Juan Sherman is a director in the Government Accountability's Office Homeland Security and Justice team. She oversees work on the protection of the nation's critical infrastructure assets and the security of the U.S. transportation system. She's also been here quite a few times. We always enjoy having her. In her over 20 years of experience, 20 years of tenure at GAO, she has done extensive work on CISA's role as the nation's risk manager and how it balances that role with its responsibilities as a sector risk management agency for 8 sectors themselves. Ms. Sherman has also led reviews on a range of issues, including telecommunications, transportation, and defense, and served in GAO's Office of Congressional Relations. Drew Bagley is the Vice President and Counsel for Privacy and Cyber Policy at CrowdStrike, where he is responsible for leading CrowdStrike's data protection initiatives, privacy strategy, and global policy engagement. He serves on the Europol Advisory Group on Internet Security, the U.S. Department of State's International Digital Economy and Telecommunication Advisory Committee, and the Domain Name System Abuse Institute's Advisory Council. Prior to joining CrowdStrike, Mr. Bagley served in the Office of General Counsel at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He will offer an important perspective on CISA's Internal to Federal Network program and value insight as a participant in CISA's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or JCDC. Heather Hogstedt is the Senior Vice President for Technology and Risk Strategy for BITS at the Bank Policy Institute. In this capacity, Ms. Hogstedt represents a heavily regulated critical infrastructure sector, the financial sector. Before joining BPI, Ms. Hogstedt served as Staff Director for Federal Relations at the National Governors Association, where she oversaw NGA's federal legislative agenda and activities on cybersecurity, homeland security, and defense, emergency management, and veterans affairs. Her experience with government and within the financial sector will help us understand the proper role for regulation and where CISA fits in as a partner to industry. And finally, we have Mr. Marty Edwards, the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for Operational Technology at Tenable. Prior to joining Tenable, Mr. Edwards served as the Global Director of Education at the International Society of Automation, as well as the longest-serving Director of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Industrial Control Systems Cyber Emergency Response Team. He brings a wealth of knowledge about critical infrastructure technology security and will be able to speak to CISA's efforts to support the community, as well as provide a perspective on CISA's JCDC. I thank all the witnesses for being here today. I now recognize Ms. Sherman for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee, I am pleased to be testifying before the subcommittee today on this important topic. As the subcommittee is keenly aware, cyber and physical attacks on critical infrastructure are on the rise, with hospitals, schools, and electricity substations all having been recent targets. Few of us are immune to the impact of these attacks, which can have debilitating effects on the assets and systems that underpin our daily lives, and also have significant financial and sometimes life-threatening implications. Strengthening the public and private sector partnership to address this national security priority is paramount. The agency I work for, GAO, has been reviewing federal efforts to secure critical infrastructure for over 2 decades and has placed protecting cyber critical infrastructure on our high-risk list in 2003. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, within the Department of Homeland Security, serves as the national coordinator for critical infrastructure security. In this role, CISA is responsible for coordinating federal actions to protect the nation against risks to this infrastructure, as well as foster collaboration between the public and private sector to share information and respond to incidents. CISA also defines how sector risk management agencies should carry out their responsibilities. and ensure that they have the guidance and support needed to effectively engage with owners and operators, those in state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, and other stakeholders. Sector risk management agencies, or SRMAs, are the federal departments with subject matter expertise in one or more of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and are responsible for leading, facilitating, and supporting critical infrastructure programs and activities in coordination with CISA. They are also uniquely positioned to partner with other government entities in the private sector. The fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act codified their responsibilities and also required GAO to review implementation of these responsibilities every 4 years through 2034. The administration's recently issued National Cybersecurity Strategy calls on SRMAs to serve as a key player in ensuring critical infrastructure security and resilience. Yet several important efforts to strengthen these agencies' ability to effectively support their sectors are underway without clear timelines for completion. This includes the rewrite of Presidential Policy Directive 21 for critical infrastructure security, along with updates to the National Infrastructure Protection Plan and all 16 sector-specific plans. The report GAO issued last month also found that CISA could assist SRMAs in implementing their responsibilities through additional guidance as well as improved communication and coordination. For example, CISA does not have a standardized approach for agencies to estimate costs or make requests for resources, does not consistently measure the maturity and effectiveness of the agencies, has created but not yet filled liaison positions with them, and does not obtain regular feedback on their partnerships. We recommended CISA establish milestones and timelines to complete these steps, which we believe would help guide and ensure a consistent level of effort across SRMAs to safeguard our nation and its people. I want to thank my team in preparing me for this hearing and to the subcommittee for including me today in this important and timely discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Sherman. I now recognize Ms. Bagley for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. Today, nation states, criminal enterprises, and hacktivist groups use sophisticated means to exploit unsophisticated vulnerabilities, to conduct espionage, breach privacy, and disrupt infrastructure. This is why it's so important to continually evolve in how we prevent, detect, and respond to cyber attacks. At CrowdStrike, we have a unique vantage point on cybersecurity threats and the innovation necessary to prevent them. We work with CISA on key programs and initiatives. We help CISA and other government agencies defend their networks. We've been involved with JCDC since its inception. We also consume CISA's advisories and are a key technology provider for its stakeholder groups, like critical infrastructure entities. This hearing is timely for several reasons. CISA has matured within a number of operational and planning functions. Major transitions are taking place in federal cybersecurity with an emphasis on zero trust adoption. Geopolitical conditions stemming from Russia's war in Ukraine and heightened competition with China have worsened the threat environment. With respect to information sharing and collaboration, the formation of JCDC in August 2021 was a key development. Since then, JCDC has created a platform for key players in industry and government to voluntarily work toward common goals. While we defer to CISA leadership to describe key outcomes, CrowdStrike values the partnership. We continue to invest time and expertise in the JCDC community, and we look forward to continued shared efforts to promote better cybersecurity. As JCDC matures, we believe the effort can continue to improve. First, consider approaches that stratify or segment membership to maintain trust. Second, strengthen administrative customer relationship management practices. To their credit, JCDC leadership and staff have been proactive about seeking feedback from participants. Like any startup, we anticipate continued iteration as the group matures into its full potential. Importantly, cybersecurity outcomes vary substantially across sectors. I've provided a brief overview in my written remarks. There remains a gap in cybersecurity performance between the haves and the have-nots, which threat actors continue to exploit and which CISA cannot solve alone. To this end, we are pleased to see reference in the new National Cybersecurity Strategy to shifting the burden for cybersecurity to those best positioned to mitigate risks. As a community, we should no longer tolerate certain software vendors externalizing the costs of, or worse, nakedly monetizing insecure software. While this policy concept must be made more concrete, a reasonable first step is ensuring that we're not rewarding vendors that cause harm. The government can lead by example, leveraging its own procurement power. This is clearly a productive area for continued congressional oversight. I'd like to offer a few key recommendations. First, the entire field must become more responsive in adapting to lessons learned. Unfortunately, cyber attacks with the potential for systemic implications take place with increasing regularity. Key lessons of recent breaches include utilize managed security services, adopt cloud-based solutions, and employ zero trust. Second, we must approach regulation deliberately and harmonize to the greatest extent possible. We must use care in advancing new requirements, use formal, open commenting periods, and use principles-based requirements rather than compliance-based approaches. And critically, federal agencies, particularly regulators, must walk the walk on cybersecurity. Third, as a community, we must focus more attention on national incident response capacity. JCDC should continue developing community response plans, and CISA should incorporate JCDC contributions in forthcoming revisions to the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. If the Chinese threat actors responsible for the Microsoft Exchange hacking campaign in 2021 had deployed ransomware at scale, large segments of the American economy could have been paralyzed. A CISA-administered program to retain outside providers for emergency incident response at entities of systemic importance could be essential in a contingency. Lastly, we must empower defenders with cutting-edge cyber defense capabilities. Too often, defenders are hobbled with ineffective technologies. Those with leading solutions are energized with radically improved morale. One idea is to consider using tax mechanisms to speed adoption of key technologies for small businesses. Ultimately, CISA and its stakeholders must continue working together collectively to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber attacks. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bagley. I now recognize Ms. Hogstead for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, honorable members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify. I'm Heather Hogstead, Senior Vice President of Technology and Risk Strategy for BITS, which is the Technology Policy Division of the Bank Policy Institute. BPI is a nonpartisan research and advocacy organization representing the nation's leading banks. Through our technology division, we work with our members on cyber risk management and critical infrastructure protection, as well as fraud reduction, regulation, and innovation. We greatly appreciate this committee's leadership and the opportunity to provide perspective on the role of CISA in defending our nation. Financial institutions are increasingly under cyber attack by foreign nations and criminal groups seeking to undermine the functioning of the U.S. economy. Our sector takes these risks seriously and has strong relationships with the Treasury Department, our sector risk management agency, as well as CISA, the National Cyber Director's Office, the FBI, the Secret Service, and also our regulators. Since being established, CISA has played a vital coordination role during the COVID-19 pandemic to keep critical infrastructure up and running. It also played a key role in the response to SolarWinds, Log4j, ransomware attacks, and ongoing geopolitical tensions with Russia. Throughout these efforts, CISA has improved its information sharing and with faster declassification of threat information, including a significant increase in publications and threat alerts, combined with recommended mitigation measures, toolkits, and other support services. Importantly, our members want to emphasize that CISA is also uniquely positioned to address longer-term strategic planning and cross-sector mitigation that would be particularly valuable for more mature sectors like financial services. As CISA continues to evolve, we encourage a focus on 3 areas. First is implementing the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. Last year, this committee led efforts, which BPI supported, to pass cyber incident reporting legislation requiring companies to report ransomware payments and cyber incidents to CISA. Implementing the new law is a significant undertaking that CISA must get right from the outset. It requires extensive coordination with critical infrastructure entities, sector risk management agencies, other government agencies, and independent regulators. As a critical infrastructure sector that has had mandatory cyber reporting requirements for more than 20 years, ensuring that the new rules are harmonized with current requirements is also a key area of focus. As CISA formulates the new rules, it should ensure that definitions, timelines, thresholds, and required incident information are aligned with existing requirements and designed to avoid interfering with response and mitigation activities at an affected entity. Second, CISA should work with industry to identify and prioritize national systemic risks. Last year, CISA received funding to develop a new systemically important entity designation. Financial institutions are very supportive of efforts to identify and prioritize critical infrastructure assets that are most important to our national security. However, it is vital that CISA clarify what it intends to accomplish with a new designation and how it relates to existing efforts, including the Section 9 list, national critical functions, and sector-specific systemic risk designations like systemically important financial institutions, or SIFIs. CISA should avoid duplication and leverage sector-specific work like ours to create a framework and methodology for identification of cross-sector risks and critical dependencies. Finally, CISA should support cross-sector collaboration and joint planning. CISA's role as national coordinator puts it in a unique position to support collaboration between critical infrastructure sectors and the government to reduce risk and disrupt threats. The Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative was helpful in bringing together industry and government partners to improve visibility and communication, particularly in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This response-oriented focus, however, has not fulfilled the need for longer-term strategic planning across government agencies and with the private sector. As authorized by Congress, CISA was charged with creating a joint cyber planning office to develop plans for cyber defense operations and coordinated actions that public and private sector entities could take to protect, mitigate, and defend against malicious cyber attacks. We have not seen the JCDC engage in this type of proactive planning, but continue to believe this would be beneficial for financial institutions and other more mature sectors. Although not addressed to date, but noted in CISA's recent strategy, we believe that building the organizational foundation for sustainable cyber defense operations and focusing on the most critical needs of the nation is of highest priority and would be the most critical accomplishment CISA could undertake at this time. On behalf of BPI, we look forward to continuing to work with this committee and with CISA, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Hogsett. I now recognize Mr. Edwards for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the committee, thank you for your opportunity to testify before you today on CISA and the state of American cybersecurity. I am Marty Edwards, Deputy Chief Technology Officer for Operational Technology at Tenable, the leading cybersecurity exposure management company with 43,000 customers worldwide, including just about every federal department and many critical infrastructure providers. From Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the Colonial Pipeline incident, we're operating in a heightened threat landscape. CISA, the National Coordinator for Critical Infrastructure Security and Resiliency, and Congress have recognized the need to prioritize critical infrastructure security. Under Director Jen Easterly's leadership, CISA has taken significant steps to strengthen the U.S. cyber posture, including through prioritizing public-private partnerships, enhancing strategic collaboration, and developing new cybersecurity initiatives in favor of greater security and resiliency, which were emphasized in the recent National Cybersecurity Strategy. This includes addressing the security of IT and OT system convergence. Operational technology, or OT, is the hardware used in manufacturing, utilities, and critical infrastructure industries. But while today's technology are implemented to improve efficiencies, the convergence of these technologies between IT and OT makes OT susceptible to many new threat vectors. Successful OT attacks can impact human safety and damage physical equipment, making this a national security imperative. Public-private sector collaboration, including CISA's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, of which Tenable is a proud alliance partner, is essential to building resilient and robust converged IT/OT environments and enabling collaboration on a range of issues. To combat the growing cyber threats, the White House tasked the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee with examining key challenges to securing converged IT/OT systems. I co-led this convergence subcommittee working group to produce a report to the President, which found that despite having the technology and the expertise to secure these systems, organizations still lack visibility into their OT environments. To strengthen the cybersecurity posture of the U.S. government-owned and operated OT systems with relatively low risk, the NSTAC report recommends 3 key steps for the U.S. government, including, number 1, issue a binding operational directive that requires federal agencies to maintain a real-time, continuous inventory of all OT systems and assets, including any interconnectivity to other systems. 2, develop guidance on procurement language for OT products and services to incentivize and prioritize cybersecurity capabilities. Existing and future technology products and services should be secure by design, especially those that support critical infrastructure. And third, prioritize the development and implementation of interoperable, technology-neutral, vendor-agnostic information sharing mechanisms to enable real-time information sharing between the U.S. critical infrastructure stakeholders. We should not allow for learned helplessness by federal government agencies or by private industry. There is too much at stake for organizations to remain negligent and not take the most basic steps to improve their cybersecurity posture. From Tenable's perspective, Congress has the opportunity to enhance U.S. preparedness by establishing baseline cybersecurity standards of care and ensuring that CISA is adequately resourced to support its critical mission. Oh, that's interesting. I don't have the rest of my page here. Sorry about that. Many critical operating environments lack a formal, systemic approach to risk assessments, let alone the continuous visibility required for critical services and high-value targets. In these instances, policy guidance can help drive improved risk management practices and foster innovation. Thank you again, Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee for your attention to these important bipartisan issues. Your continued assessment of the work CISA is doing to help keep Americans safe and for the opportunity to testify here today. I look forward to working with you to secure our nation's cyber assets and answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Ms. Sherman, Congress has increased CISA's budget from $1.68 billion to $2.9 billion in a couple of years. This is a big increase, even for a mature department. In your experience analyzing CISA more broadly since its inception, how has this increase in budget changed CISA's coordination assistance to the private sector?
CISA a few years back, as it was stood up and then subsequently within a couple of years undertook a reorganization. And as a function of that reorganization, there was movement within the agency to kind of reshape different offices and the roles that they played. I think, GAO, we took a look at the reorganization and at that time made a number of recommendations with respect to coordination and other issues, both coordination within CISA and coordination between CISA, sector risk management agencies, state and local entities, and the private sector. And a number of those recommendations still remain open. So in part, the additional budget that the agency has been receiving over time and how it's using those funds is really important as it's thinking about implementing not only the recommendations that we made, but being able to implement an effective organization to be able to address cybersecurity issues and infrastructure security issues, the different parts of its mission. But it remains a challenge because it has a lot of priorities on its plate. And it also, is at, I think, a difficult position with challenges with respect to the cybersecurity workforce as well, and being able to fill positions within the agency. So we continue to monitor and watch the efforts that they have undertaken, but it's a daunting task in a lot of ways.
And I'm not going to ask you for the list of recommendations they haven't fulfilled yet right now. So, but if you can get that to us, that'd be great to have for the upcoming hearing we're going to have with Director.
Absolutely.
And I just want to ask, has CISA's sector risk management agency capabilities matured at a similar rate to its budget growth, or they?
And that's an interesting question. We cannot say for certain. Part of that is, and as part with our current review, or the review that we just recently completed and issued a report on, we attempted to try to get an understanding and spoke with all of the sector risk management agencies to understand exactly what their maturity levels are and the extent to which they've been effective in their roles. But CISA doesn't have a very good handle on what that looks like. And in fact, we heard that directly also from those agencies themselves. So as part of the recommendation that we made was to be able to establish milestones and timelines to implement some of the efforts they have underway, one of which is being able to better understand and assess maturity and effectiveness of those agencies.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hogshead, I want to move over to you now. I'm fortunate not only to serve as chairman of this committee, but as a member of financial services. I look forward to working with BPI and other financial service industry stakeholders on cyber issues. But I want to ask you, how has the authorization, I think you mentioned a little bit in your opening statement, how has the authorization of new reporting requirements like the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act changed your sector's relationship with CISA?
Thank you for the question. So I think our relationship with CISA right now is we have a very good relationship. CISA has been able to establish itself as a trusted partner, not only for our sector, but a variety of others. So I think the voluntary information sharing that they have today will be improved with implementation of the new incident reporting rules. But it is really important throughout that process that CISA look at the existing regulations. We within the financial sector have several that are all sort of happening at the same time and impacting a firm in a really challenging way. So just by way of example, we, from our regulatory perspective, have an incident notification rule to notify our primary regulators within 36 hours that a significant event may have occurred. Then the reporting to CISA after that with more detail within 72 hours, which the benefit of that will help CISA have a better view of the threats and what's happening out there to improve its ability to support critical infrastructure. So we very firmly believe that this is important work. But then for us now and other companies who fall under the Securities and Exchange Commission, we are also then potentially facing about a day later a public notification of those same incidents and challenges, which will undermine some of the work that has been done by our regulators and by CISA. So we think that CISA is in an important role to really move forward and get this right. There is a requirement to streamline those requirements, which we stand ready to assist and engage with them to help make that happen. It will be a key challenge. And I think most importantly, the fact that CISA is not a regulator will be helpful in this effort.
I appreciate that. My time has expired, so I now call. Oh, God, I lost that part of the questions. Okay, sure. I now recognize Representative Carter for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, ranking members. Member Rattler, thank you all for being here. Ms. Hogshead, in your submitted testimony, you emphasized that in order for there to be successful implementation of CICRA, it is critically important that these agencies harmonize for their reporting requirements to optimize protection and response, a streamlined coordination. Let's take a step back here and see how private sector entities, specifically the banking sector, for which you are an expert, can speak to how the private sector assesses cyber risk internally, how they ensure the risk assessments that they utilize are objective, independent, and reliable.
So financial institutions have a variety of different requirements that we need to meet with our regulators. So we have, just at the federal level, we have, for instance, the Federal Reserve Board, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, all of whom look at cyber risk management practices. They look at third-party risk management. They look at how you architect your systems for operational resilience. So what firms do internally is we have actually what we refer to as a three lines of defense model, in essence, where you have your frontline cyber defenders doing a lot of work. You will have a second line, which is independent of that, and will look at those policies and programs and challenge them internally. And then you have a third line internally, which is internal audit, which will then do all of that same work again from yet another independent perspective. And then we have, for the largest institutions, they have an on-site examiner sitting in their headquarters, working with them day in and day out. So there was an ongoing oversight relationship there. So it's a very complex, interwoven set of rules and requirements that we work with every day.
And you, what input do you get from outside with that, do you?
So firms will bring in outside security consultants to do additional reviews of their systems. They will do things like penetration testing to sort of test how good their defenses are from a variety of different angles. They will assess themselves independently against things like the NIST cybersecurity framework. And that happens alongside and in addition to the regulatory oversight that happens. And all of that gets reported up to senior management and the board of directors level for regular conversation and action.
So with technology moving as fast as it does, would you, as you evaluate the risk, the pace at which the bad guys, if you will, are getting technology to undermine systems, how are we doing with keeping pace with the outside forces that we have to manage?
It is absolutely a challenge, and it is one reason why you need to ensure that any rules put in place are flexible and can be adaptable over time, because the threats do change. So we have layered defense models. Zero trust was mentioned earlier. That's one of multiple things that we will employ. And the challenge there is in the regulatory structure to be nimble and get that right and not dictate that something has to be protected a certain way or with a certain type of technology, because I think that's where you can run into challenges. You need that flexibility and that ability to be nimble in how you're protecting your organization.
Thank you. Ms. Swan-Sherman, presently FISMA requires annual audits of federal government entities to conduct cybersecurity compliance and risk assessment. Their inspector general or an independent auditor can conduct this for them. This ensures reliability of the information that they share with CISA. It ensures accountability. What can be done to ensure that this reliability and accountability with private sector entities as information sharing reporting requirements expand?
With respect to the ability to ensure reliability of the data and information sharing, I think it's important, we've been talking today so far about the partnerships and the relationships not only between CISA and the sector risk management agencies, but between the sector risk management agencies and all of the other critical infrastructure entities that they rely on, the owners and operators, the SLTTs, and others in the private sector. And that partnership is critical in order to be able to bring and be able to receive reliable information. But that comes from a place of trust, which can be challenging sometimes to be able to acquire that type of information on a regular basis, and again, have that flow of information in order to be able to really kind of understand what actions are being taken, and also how the specific sectors are carrying out their work in order to be able to improve cybersecurity. So I think the partnerships, working to strengthen those partnerships, would help to encourage trust and would contribute to building the information sharing or improve information sharing in order to have more reliable data.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize my friend from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for 5 minutes. Questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman of the committee's Transportation and Maritime Services Subcommittee, I have distinct interest in transportation and maritime cybersecurity. And so In light of what happened in the Colonial Pipeline a couple of years ago, Mr. Bagley, have you seen any improvements in our posture, in our ability to stop these kind of attacks, ransomware and others in the future, in our pipelines?
Thank you for the question. There has been vast improvement from a technological standpoint in terms of the capabilities available, as well as the ability for those cyber have-nots to be able to acquire sophisticated defensive cybersecurity technologies in recent years. However, there is still a great disparity between those who are deploying these technologies, like endpoint detection and response, zero trust architecture, identity protection, and whatnot, and those who are not. However, one of the things that we've seen as a positive development in recent years has been the call to action from Executive Order 14028, which calls out the very same cybersecurity technologies that are successful by many large entities in the private sector. And CISA's efforts to expand use of these technologies within federal government, as well as within critical infrastructure entities, is one where we're still in the early stages, but so far we are seeing the technology proliferated more. And I think that that's important because right now we're really in a war of innovation against adversaries. Adversaries traditionally had to have some sort of technological ability themselves, and now we're in an era in which literally there are access brokers that sell credential access to victim organizations. We're in an era in which there is not only ransomware, but ransomware as a service, meaning a threat actor does not actually have to develop the ransomware themselves or even operate it in many cases in order to deploy it and target it. So that's where the threatscape has changed in recent years, and yet the defensive capabilities are fortunately improving.
So are you saying that you have like rent a cyber attack?
That's correct, Congressman. It is now possible not only for ransomware, but for other types of services, such as if a threat actor wants to do data leak extortion, whereby they infiltrate a victim organization, exfiltrate data, hold it ransom, and perhaps leak some of it subject to a ransom, or purely for embarrassment and destruction of that organization's reputation. They're able to do so without actually being able to code themselves or even have the infrastructure, because they can rent it in the same way that we use different services today, or the same way we pay for our monthly services as consumers.
Where are the vast majority of these companies for rent? Where are they located?
These threat actors are located throughout the world. Our reporting certainly shows that naturally there are a lot of threat actors based in Eastern Europe and in Russia who run some of these ransomware as a service operations, but they're proliferated throughout the world.
The ones that are operating out of Russia, is it your thought that they are wink, nod, et cetera, they're allowed to operate in Russia by the Russian government? If the Russian government wanted to shut them down, could they?
From what we've seen, we've certainly seen use of nation states, including Russia, utilizing and leveraging the capabilities of e-crime actors to carry out state goals and means, and that's certainly the case with Russia.
What about China?
China traditionally targets just about every sector. Recently, we released our global threat report, and in it, what we saw from the data that we've analyzed is that China has targeted just about every sector, not only in the United States, but also more broadly around the globe for its aims.
Does anybody attack China?
I imagine there are others who might be able to answer that on behalf of the U.S. government, but certainly cyber attacks are rampant everywhere.
I mean, look, I mean, in a nuclear age, we have, mutually assured destruction, and which kind of kept the peace. I mean, we never did fire the missiles and all that. So, do you find that the Russians and maybe the Chinese and those bad actors are operating with impunity? Is that your opinion?
Well, what we see is that you not only have nation-state actors to contend with in the modern era, but you also have e-crime groups, which will run by their own rules, as well as hacktivist organizations, which will be motivated by specific aims related to issues.
Okay, thank you very much. Time's up. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Mr. Menendez for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening us here today. Thank you to our witnesses and to our ranking member. In recent years, communities across the country have been impacted by the spike in ransomware attacks. Last year, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Congress provided $1 billion over 4 years in new grants to improve the cybersecurity of state and local governments. Mr. Edwards, as state and local governments seek to utilize this new funding to strengthen their cybersecurity, how should they prioritize their cybersecurity investments? Do you believe additional support for state and local cybersecurity will be necessary going forward?
Thank you very much for your question. In general, my perspective is that we should look at those systems that have the highest risk to society. And in my perhaps not so humble opinion, that usually falls to these operational technology systems that operate things like power grids, pipelines, and other infrastructure that's critical. I think that both the U.S. federal government and state and local governments have done a reasonably good job of prioritizing what I would call information technology or IT security over the years, right? But we certainly are behind in investing in these protection of these critical systems that are in industrial control system applications or other operational technology applications. I think when it comes to funding for the states, that seems to be a good mechanism that we use in our country to ensure that the state and local governments have the adequate types of programs that they need to run. And I think that cybersecurity is going to benefit, for example, from the cybersecurity language that was inserted into the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and things like that. So I see some positive trends with regards to funding at the state and local level. They do need to, I think, move beyond, some of the other witnesses talked about going in to do an assessment of a facility or a system. We used to do that kind of on a periodic basis. You'd go in and hire a consultant and do an assessment once a year or once every 3 years, and it would satisfy your compliance requirements. I don't think that we can live in that world anymore. We need to move to continuous visibility so that we know what's happening on those networks at all times, rather than waiting for somebody to come in 2 years to tell us that we were hacked a year and a half ago. Thank you for your question.
No, I appreciate your answer. Mr. Bagley, you've mentioned a couple of times the cybersecurity have and have-nots. We're still clearly trying to come up with a cohesive system to address our greatest, highest risk assets. Talk to us about some of the challenges in scaling up cybersecurity protections for all different segments of our industries, economy, folks of different size who want to implement cybersecurity best practices, but one, have a allocation of resource challenge, and two, I think the director also mentioned the cybersecurity workforce, and are we training enough people? So sort of a two-part question, but would love to get your thoughts on those items.
Thank you for the question. One of the recent positive developments that we've seen is that managed service providers are able to augment existing security programs or sometimes completely replace security in an organization that would not otherwise be able to afford to have its own security program. One of the advantages of modern managed service providers is that managed service providers can bring the very same sorts of cybersecurity best practices that are currently called upon in the US government today, such as endpoint detection and response, as well as proactive threat hunting. And one of the things that managed service providers can bring is scale, meaning that a small organization that might not be as well resourced, a cybersecurity have-not, could easily utilize a managed service provider instead of building its own security program. Whereas if we look back not that many years ago, when we looked at the cybersecurity haves and have-nots, the have-nots would not have the capabilities of building their own security program. It might not have an alternative. And today there exists an alternative. And I think that's something that can be highly effective. And I think that can be highly effective too, when we look at the SLTT space and we look at the broader federal government space and think about shared services models. So for example, with CISA, with its newer powers as a CISO, CISA is able to bring to bear cybersecurity capabilities to government agencies that traditionally have lacked the same resources as their larger counterparts. And this trend is one that we see in the private sector as well.
Appreciate it. In 4 seconds, I'll yield back the remainder of the time, but do want to hopefully eventually get everyone's thoughts, either in writing, but about the challenges that we're seeing from a workforce perspective and what we could do with the federal government to ensure that we're aiding in developing that workforce so we can meet these challenges with a robust system. I do apologize for going over, Chair.
Not a problem. Gentleman yields back. I now recognize my friend from Mississippi, Mr. Ezell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a former sheriff with decades of experience fighting to protect the people and communities around South Mississippi, I'm eager to join the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Subcommittee to combat the threat of the malicious cyber actors. Mr. Bagley, you've talked today about how JCDC aims to connect private industry with federal partners such as DOD, the intelligence community, and law enforcement. In your role, can you describe how JCDC interacts with local law enforcement?
Thank you for the question. From my perspective as a stakeholder in JCDC, from what we've seen is we've seen it's very issue-oriented. So, for example, if there is an issue such as certainly what we saw come to bear with Log4j, where CISA was rallying all members to come together, bring information, share information, and consume information. We've certainly seen involvement at all levels of government in where JCDC can share information, specifically in terms of how local law enforcement is prioritized within the apparatus of JCDC. I would defer to CISA leadership, but we've certainly seen involvement across industry and across government in JCDC.
Do you think the balance between CISA's asset response and the FBI's threat response activities has been successful?
I think that there are certainly different missions at play, and one of the strengths of JCDC is that it's not trying to necessarily define a brand new mission for all stakeholders, but instead be a centralized place where stakeholders with different missions can come and cooperate. And so naturally, the FBI having an interest in law enforcement and focusing on seeking justice for victims is one where the FBI obviously has its own resources and has its own ad hoc relationships with partners. But I think the strength is the FBI can bring its expertise to JCDC, and similarly, JCDC and its mission as a civilian agency focused on cybersecurity for regulated entities as well as a convener of public and private partnerships can utilize that expertise and the expertise of others. And I think that naturally strengthens the dynamic, especially if we think about having this system in place in the event of big events, such as the Log4 Shell, Log4j event.
Thank you. I want to move on the importance of leveling the playing field to ensure there's active participation from a mix of large and small-sized companies. What can CISA do to be more business-friendly in order to increase participation?
I think that as JCDC grows in its structure, I think it's important to put into place different structures so that as it expands, there can be different working groups that might be well-suited for organizations of different sizes or organizations focused on different topics in general. So I think that's one way. I think also CISA, what we've seen in recent years is CISA has certainly demonstrated its ability to serve as a clearinghouse for certain types of information and proliferate that information to the community. I think that's another one where there is an awareness component in addition to, of course, a resource component when we think about the cybersecurity haves and the have-nots. And I think CISA has an important role to play and that it has been playing in recent years with regard to raising awareness not only about cybersecurity threats, but also cybersecurity resources and capabilities. And I would expect that that would continue to grow and expand and be for the benefit of smaller entities.
Thank you for your answer. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the ranking member, Mrs. Swalwell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Great. Ms. Sherman, GAO has made a number of recommendations related to how CISA can improve its support to critical infrastructure and sector risk management agencies. Can you just prioritize those recommendations?
What I would want to do is I would want to highlight, actually in our recently issued report from last month, we included a section in the report where we outlined all outstanding open recommendations that we had made to sector risk management agencies specific to critical infrastructure, of which there are many. There are challenges in prioritizing those recommendations, but what we would say with respect to CISA is that it's important for CISA to take, in the near term, a set of following actions. We think that there's gaps in guidance that the agency could provide to SRMAs. In part, this has to do with the national plan and being able to update the national plan and the sector-specific plans. We understand that there's a pause, essentially, that's going on with a lot of the sector risk management agencies because of the PPD 21 rewrite, but we think that CISA can be taking action in the interim to position themselves to be able to update those plans expeditiously once the rewrite is completed. We also feel that there could be opportunities, of course, to be able to standardize a set of approaches in order to really understand, harking back to what we were talking about a little bit before, how mature and how effective these agencies are in their efforts. And so we would want CISA to prioritize being able to collect that information. And I think finally that feedback loop of really being able to understand what the relationships are like between the sector risk management agencies and all of their partners. Look at those existing partnerships, getting a recognition of what's working and perhaps what's not and where improvements can be made.
Great. Exactly the cogent answer I'd expect from a fellow government and politics degree holder from the University of Maryland.
I noticed that. Thank you.
Go Terps.
Go Terps.
Mr. Edwards, could I also ask you, JCDC has a new dedicated unit focused on industrial control system security. What should we expect to see from the JCDC ICS?
Yeah, thank you for your question. It certainly is a fairly new initiative that the JCDC has taken on to build a dedicated group or a tiger team, I guess, of sorts for industrial control systems. I think I agree with my other witnesses here that have stated that in order to be successful, the JCDC is going to have to be able to break some of these topics down into smaller operational discussions, rather than having every discussion happen with the entire group, right? This is going to be a scalability challenge of sorts, right? Where we can't solve every problem with everybody in every room. We have to break these into smaller digestible pieces. So I believe that we will see a lot of good information come out of the JCDC ICS group or OT group. The other thing I believe that is important that CISA can work on here is with regards to the CIRCIA incident reporting. You know, that information, when it comes in and is analyzed, needs to be disseminated to technology service providers such as represented here, so that we can build the coverage to detect those threats or those weaknesses in those systems in a timely fashion. And so we're eager to work with CISA and the JCDC construct on how to best make this into a machine-readable, real-time information sharing platform.
Great. And building off of Mr. Menendez's point at the end of his questioning, Mr. Edwards, what is your assessment of the current state of our nation's OT cybersecurity workforce? And what can the federal government do to ensure that OT cybersecurity skills are prioritized in any workforce development training?
Yeah, it's a very complex problem, right? So you have sort of this overlap between cybersecurity professionals who typically come from business colleges or degrees. They've come up through the business side of a corporation or an enterprise. And the operational technology people such as myself come from an engineering background. And many of the engineering schools, the curricula is such that there's no more room to put in more stuff into in there to talk about cybersecurity. You know, they're going through the physics and the basics of an engineering discipline. So I think that in some cases, the educational institutions themselves are somewhat challenged with how to put this in. Another thing that I believe is that we have a little bit of a chicken or the egg problem, right? As the NSTAC report stated, we believe that the United States actually has the technology and actually has the knowledge base to solve these problems. We just haven't manifested it at scale. So I think things like the NICE framework that they're coming out with workforce development that are focusing more on OT are good initiatives, and we should continue to invest there.
Great. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Lee from Florida for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my former role as Florida Secretary of State, I worked extensively with CISA in securing our elections infrastructure. CISA was a key partner to state and local elections officials, and I look forward to our work together to ensure that we are advancing cybersecurity across all of the critical infrastructure sectors. My questions, I'd like to begin with you, Ms. Juan Sherman, and specifically in the subject of elections and election security, since it has been designated part of our critical infrastructure. And first this, because CISA has become such an important part of assisting and aiding state and local election officials, would you describe for me some of the things that you think are working well there, or if there are other places where CISA needs additional support or resources from Congress to make sure that you can do that job effectively?
So the election security subsector is relatively nascent in some respects. I think just a little over 5 years old, and the subsector specific plan that guides it also is somewhat outdated. So for the last election, guidance was put out by the Subsector Coordinating Council to ensure that there was more kind of relevant, timely understanding of efforts, and to be able to kind of fill that gap for, or in the absence of an updated plan. In the recent review that we carried out, we did hear from individuals that we spoke with, officials that we spoke with, that and actually as part of the priorities work for last year that we had carried out with CISA, that the agency has done a good job of sharing election-specific information that's general, so kind of nationwide threats to consider, but that there was an interest and a desire for and a need for more locally tailored information. And so the information they had was limited along those lines, and they were looking for more. We also heard that with respect to day of capabilities and ability to have a kind of a quick response for incidents that occur, that CISA should build their capacity along those lines as well.
And you just touched on something that is another area of interest for me, and that is specifically the incident response capability. At present, is CISA able to meet the call when that's coming in, or are you receiving a larger number of requests for that more hands-on critical incident response than you can provide?
I can only speak to the conversations and the information that we had and collected during the course of our specific review, but that is something that we had heard from election officials at the local level, that there was a concern that the agency did not necessarily have those capabilities in place to be able to quickly address an incident that might occur, and they were looking to work and partner with CISA to help build that capacity.
And do you have any thoughts? And another feature, I think, of the approach to securing infrastructure is a need for CISA to work collaboratively with other federal law enforcement partners. Any feedback for us about how that is going, or any input about how the relationships with other federal law enforcement partners are productive or could use additional enhancement?
We didn't collect any information specific to the relationship between law enforcement and the election officials, or it didn't come up specifically in the course of our review, so I can't speak in detail to that. But I can talk to the fact that local officials also pointed to limited awareness and conversations or dialogue at the federal level, and that they wanted to see more of that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I will now move into a second round of questions. I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Ms. Hogsett, recently, the Biden administration released its new national cybersecurity strategy. Strategy rightly emphasizes the need to harmonize regulations to avoid duplication and overly burdensome requirements. But the implementation plan will be key to demonstrating how they actually plan to achieve harmonization. What sorts of aspects will you look for in the eventual implementation plan to deconflict requirements?
Thank you for the question. We've actually started discussing implementation with the National Cyber Director's Office because this is such a critical issue for us to get right. The challenge that we in financial services face, and certain other sectors will as well, is the fact that most of our regulators are independent. So no matter what, CISA may put out, it's still up to them, in essence, whether they will follow that and align. We are lucky that 3 of our primary regulators collaborate with each other and have done a lot of work to sort of streamline and align their requirements where they can. And I know they're participating in some of these government conversations right now, but that's like 3 out of 9, for instance, that we have to work with across our sector. So it's really important for us, and actually something where Congress could help, I think, is encourage when it comes to cybersecurity, given the importance of getting it right, given the workforce challenges that we've just been discussing, we are frankly hearing increasing concern from our member firms that the regulatory and government reporting requirements are placing a strain on the existing staff. We have some figures that folks are spending anywhere from 30 to 40% of their time not focused on the day-to-day protective mission that is so important that they need to do. Instead, they're focusing on compliance matters. That's a challenge. And that can't continue as we layer on new and additional requirements, which each on their own can be very beneficial, but when you layer them together, it's a real challenge. So our hope and the discussion that we've started having with the White House is how can we get to sort of this idea of regulatory reciprocity where one regulator might accept another's work? Where can you create even an 80% solution where you align on the core things that various regulators and government agencies would want, and then you're just doing some additional pieces above that? That's the conversation that we're looking forward to contributing to and is critically important for us.
I appreciate that answer, and I know everybody talks about workforce. It's something that I think we're going to have a separate hearing just on workforce if we need to. And I did want to ask you this before when we were talking about the incident reporting legislation and the rulemaking that's going on. With the implementation, we've heard about how there's no private sector workforce. There's a lot of people. Does CISA have the proper amount of workforce for a proper implementation of the incident reporting language, in your opinion?
It's a very good question. I'm not sure. What we would hope to see at this point is 1 or 2 people are in office set up that we can go to on a regular basis to have a dialogue. That's what we do with our regulators. We would like to see CISA set that up. It was good that they put out a request for information. We certainly responded to that. They did a series of sort of listening sessions. But there's so many, as you know, the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, each of them is so unique. And for those that have regulations, even those regulations, whether you're talking from an OT or an IT perspective, they can be very different. So we think and would love support to have CISA set up more ongoing dialogue so we can kind of help them jointly problem solve to make sure they get this right.
I appreciate that answer. I have one final question for Mr. Bagley. I understand CISA, through the JCDC, plans to update the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. In your view, where does CISA's role start and stop in terms of incident response and support of the private sector?
Well, I think we have to think about what the stakes are today. What we've seen in recent years with some of the high-profile systemic cyber attacks that JCDC, in fact, has responded to, like the Log4j incident, is that they could have been so much worse. And so one of the things we have to anticipate, and that should certainly be considered in that planning, is how we as a nation would deal not just with currently designated infrastructure, but how would we deal with some sort of victim that in a specific context is fundamentally important, and that them being hit by, say, disruptive or destructive ransomware would be catastrophic for the country. And that's where it's important to be able to have that flexibility to respond, to rally both the public and private sector together to ensure that we have the capacity. One of the things that we see in the private sector is that the way complex multinational organizations or large US organizations respond is by ensuring that they have playbooks ahead of time, as well as the actual resources on retainer, such as incident response firms. And I think for CISA to be able to scale up, they must consider not only their own organic capacity, but those of private partners as well.
Thank you. I'm out of time. And I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Swalwell, for his second round of 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Hogsett, wanted to get the benefit of your wisdom on a recent banking crisis that especially hit my area. That's Silicon Valley Bank. And, we're still taking an MRI to this to see exactly what happened. But one thing that was different in this quote-unquote run on the bank than any other was, the speed at which it happened. And of course, in the digital age, the speed at which you can move money is different than having to wait on the phone or wait in line in past crises. But we're also looking at the role that online chatter and online panic and rumors led to this run on the bank. And I've sent a letter to the SEC with my colleague Brad Sherman, asking them as well to look at whether there was a short that took place that was followed by any sort of online manipulation of the market. But have you all at the Bank Policy Institute, just in the realm of cyber, looked at whether there was a potential cyber incident around the run on Silicon Valley Bank?
Specific to Silicon Valley Bank, we have not. I think it's early stages, so I would be getting ahead of, I think, all of us who want to get to a better sense for what happened and where were the deficiencies. It's an interesting point, though, around the role of social media, and we actually saw this with Colonial Pipeline, to provide another example where the initial reports were that there were going to be sufficient gas supply, but when it hit the news, human behavior kicked in, and you had, in essence, like what we saw with the run on a bank, you had a run on gas stations. So it's a new era where we need to think about how do we communicate and involving social media. Treasury is our sector risk management agency, and we have also actually recently re-looked at our communications plans, including among large banks, the trade associations, our Information Sharing Analysis Center, and Treasury's role with the regulators as to, at various points in time, based on certain scenarios, when might it make sense for the Treasury Secretary to put something out. So we do that sort of planning work and do exercise that. So can't respond specifically to the SVB example, but we are carefully watching that. So.
Did that incident at Silicon Valley Bank, though, did it give you concern that a foreign adversary or a hacktivist could seize on a bank crisis like that and use online information or disinformation to try and manipulate a result or to cause further chaos?
We did not see indicators of that with this recent issue. However, the potential for mis, dis, and malinformation is very real, and that is something that CISA has done some work on. We've contributed to that. It is something that firms need to consider, and our firms internally for their own response playbooks think about those dynamics as they plan for when do you notify your board internally, if it hits the media, what then? And it makes the response that much more complex, quite frankly, to think about it that way.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Hogsett. Mr. Bagley, how can CISA give JCDC the structure and clarity it needs to sustain momentum over time? And how can we do that without losing the flexible, agile features that make it successful today?
Thank you for the question. I think one of the things that's very important is for CISA to ensure that as JCDC grows, it's growing with intention, with deliberation, and with a bit more structure. So that's not to say that there's one ideal size for JCDC. Certainly, there are strengths to the fact that there are more members bringing more capabilities. But the more that CISA can actually structure with purpose and with theme different working groups, I think that can lead to certain advantages and certain efficiencies. Just as any organization that's going from startup to scale needs to adjust and reorganize, I think that is the case with JCDC today. So it would be more structure and more working groups.
Great. Nothing further. Yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. I thank the witnesses for the valuable testimony and the members for their questions. We got a lot of information today, and we're going to have to digest this and, hopefully get some answers from Director Easterly when she comes in. I talked about we're going to have, I think, a future hearing on workforce. I think we should have one on IT/OT. I mean, there's some really important stuff that was brought up to here today. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to the committee rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, this subcommittee stands adjourned.